Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcoming you to the third panel discussion of the day. And we've heard so much in our previous sessions. We've seen two panel discussions: profit by design and breakthrough innovations in construction design and project management. We've also had a wonderful keynote speaker that was there. Now, in this particular session, the upcoming panel discussion, what we're going to talk is the infusion of technology in the process of design. We've seen so much computational software, so many different kind of tech coming into place that is now redefining the way we design in itself. And not only that, designing certain spaces in itself has changed because there's been so many cross-pollination of design elements from, you can see that workspaces are getting more homelier. There is residential design getting, getting into workspace design. Workspaces are becoming more like our living rooms. We have hospitals that are being treated like hotels, whereas hotels that are being converted into quarantine facilities and healthcare facilities. Now, these are the kind of cross-pollination that kind of saw its peak in 2019 and 2020 at its most. And we will see how this is going ahead from here on. And to take this panel discussion on, we have with us Ashish Puri from Colliers, who's going to moderate this panel discussion. And I'm going to hand this over to Ashish to take this forward. Ashish, over to you.
Hello, all. We'll straight away get into the panel discussion. So today we're discussing the topic, which is the architecture of resilience and how design and technology can act as tool to weather against disruptions. So barely 3 months into 2020 is when we first sensed or sort of realized that something is not going on the expected lines. Disruptions created due to pandemic had already touched all our lives as we were locked inside our homes, wondering what next. The very same time, resilience, which is naturally built into humans, was already at play, while the health workers donning the PPEs, were battling it out on the front lines. Most of the businesses had slowly started to function mostly from homes, thanks to the technology and the platforms available, like the Zoom or the Teams or, all of that. In simple terms, resilience is our ability to bounce back from disruptions. The year 2020 will be remembered as the year of learnings, and the biggest learning is our resilience, how we are sort of bouncing back from the crisis. And today we're going to discuss about the architecture of resilience, or how resilience and architecture, we're looking at that as the way forward. We would begin with the architecture of resilience has always been part of the practice, and it's been there for years because, the concept of designing buildings and spaces which sort of protect us, from the weather changes or the natural calamities has been always been part of the design. But today we will discuss, with our experienced panel of experts, all of you, the increased significance of resilient architecture in the present context and the role of this, design technology integration as we go forward in future. So we will begin our panel discussion with Mr. Chandavakar. So I'm going to start with you, sir. And we'll start with something fundamental, something basic is what we're going to begin with. And we would like to hear from you that how resilience can be applied in architecture and how different it is. The idea of resilience, from sustainability. Often it's sort of gets confused. So your thoughts on that, sir, to begin with.
Well, I think resilience and sustainability are very intertwined. One implicates the other, so I wouldn't like to segregate them. The concern I have in the way this discussion was framed is we talked about how design and technology can act as tools to weather against disruption. But if I look at how the discussion points are elaborated on that, it tends to focus more on technology and less on design.
Right, sir.
And
I've asked a design. I've kept the technology out to begin with and started with a more design focused discussion.
so I think the issue of the fundamentals of architecture have become even more important. That it's much more important for architecture to move beyond just aesthetic appeal and look at cultures of inhabitation and how I mean the meaning in our work is not what we as architects wish to say, but how we facilitate for the inhabitant a meaningful experience in the design. And as soon as you say meaningful experience, you have to tie in issues of environment and ecology. As to what the pandemic and its disruptions have taught us, one, I think there's an impact more on urban planning than on architecture. That we have to look at the fact that we have very partial imaginations of the city and the huge segments of the population who don't fall into our current paradigm of urban planning. And we saw that the fact that we don't even perceive these people was seen in the way the migrant crisis was unleashed by the lockdown. And what was supposed to contain the virus actually sent people on the move and achieved absolutely the opposite. And it affected us in cities also because the virus does not know boundaries of class and caste and economy and all of that. It goes everywhere. So we have to, I think we have to realize that everybody's welfare is also our own welfare, and we have to think that way. But it's going to have fundamental disruptions in other areas. For example, workplace design. I don't think we're going to return to the normal workplace, even after we have a vaccine and herd immunity and the pandemic is behind us. Uh, the idea of work from anywhere has taken root, and it changes a lot of things. It just changes the talent acquisition game. It changes so many rules. It gets into employee desires. So we have to look at the workplace anew and not just as a place for accommodating people who are working in a cubicle grid, but look at the culture of the workplace. Look at how a more entrepreneurial style needs to pervade throughout the workplace and the impact it has on design. So I think a lot of typologies need to be fundamentally reassessed, and we have to think of that as designers.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your remarks and insights about how we have to deal with disruption or probably live with them for some time. You mentioned about the workspace, and we'll certainly touch upon that as we further progress with our discussions. So Sanjay, I'm going to come to you next. And Sanjay, this is about we are witnessing the highest level of cross pollination across various asset classes, or we can call it various sectors. We are seeing how the offices, or rather how the houses, are sort of getting converted into offices. We've seen hotels getting converted into quarantine centers, hospitals, things like that. So how do you think we as industry are responding to this? Where is the thought process, and then how this is actually getting addressed by us as the design industry? So your thoughts on that, Sanjay, over to you.
See, everything is moving to mixed uses, so there's no silos in the use of buildings anymore. So if you look at the larger developments that are happening across the country or like wherever across the globe, they are thinking of multi uses of let's say a vicinity. It's not about just a building, but yeah, how do you develop these mixed use developments where you have everything. You have residential, you have commercial, you have uh, cinemas, amenities, all that kind of stuff. So it's moving to mixed use developments. And what's interesting is just taking you from Mr. Chanavarkar, what he mentioned about master planning. So master planning is going to be very key to how we respond to this disruption, and we've experienced this disruption. Though we've all responded in different ways, but what's going to happen is people are talking about 15-minute walk to your work, or 15 minutes for everything. So how do you have developments where you have access to all your amenities, your daily needs within 15 minutes? You don't have to drive to your workplace. So let's say there are different hubs from where you can work remotely. So offices may also become fluid going forward. Yes, there is. We've done a lot of survey across the globe, and we believe in a lot of research. We invest a lot of money in research also as a firm. So what we've seen through these surveys is people are tending to move towards a hybrid workplace. It's no more going to be just working from your office. People have realized that there can be efficiencies if you allow people to have choice. So earlier we were talking about choice within the work environment, like within a building, you had different choice seatings, and where you could work from your cafeteria, or you could work from a social hub or an energy hub. So there are different names, or you create these garages within your work environment where you allow teams to work and collaborate. So it's not just going to be that. What it's going to do is it's going to shift to a different level where you allow people not just within the workspace but outside the workspace. So let's say a big organization or tech giant may decide to have satellite offices within the city. So, and people may choose to visit those satellite offices for most of the week, and they work from there. And maybe a couple of days, if they have to collaborate or meet in person into a central hub, they may move there. So this is what we are seeing, and I think there will be a shift to we will see the shift. So the spaces, the workspaces will provide choice, and also the offices, the organizations will provide choice to their employees to work from anywhere. They may visit their satellite offices and work from there. They may allow them to work from home. So we will see a lot of these changes happening in the coming future.
Right, Sanjay. Thanks for your response on that. But surprisingly to the thing that you spoke about 15-minute city, which is a wonderful example. But I also would like to touch upon the point where you mentioned that, it's going to be work from anywhere, and that's going to be the normal in future. But if I look at the recent, transactions, what are happening, the large companies are still going ahead and then,
Yeah.
probably taking up, 1 million square foot or 500,000 square foot. So why would they do that? I mean, just out of curiosity, this is the
Uh,
question.
so, so offices are not going to go away. So that's not what I'm saying. So
Right.
offices are not going to go away. So there are these, let's say, the e-commerce. Let's say that's growing exponentially. So e-commerce people, or let's say the Googles or the Amazons or the Flipkarts, they will keep continue to expand because there has been a huge shift to e-commerce. People have learned. People who were not used to, like my mother, if she never used Paytm, now she knows how to use Paytm, and she knows how to order online. So if there has this pandemic, what it has done is it has taught everybody to function uh, like conveniently and have access to things which they didn't have access to before. So, but that doesn't mean that these organizations will not continue to grow. Offices will continue to grow. People will want FaceTime. So right now, this panel discussion is not nowhere close to what it would mean. Let's say we were
Absolutely.
meeting in person and having this discussion and having a conversation. Yes, technology has helped us a lot, and there'll be a huge investment into technology also to allow people to do meetings virtually much better than we are doing. It could be like uh, the way VR and those kind of technology. So you will see artificial intelligence coming into play. You will see that people uh, may make their presence felt into a meeting room. Like you may arrive into a meeting room virtually. So there will be a shift, and people will invest into this technology because, God forbid, if there's another pandemic or something worse than this happens, so people will want to be prepared and they'll invest in this future. But
Right.
having said that, offices are not going to go away. Whatever research we've done, there's no replacement for in-person interactions,
Absolutely.
so that's not going to get replaced anyway soon.
Thanks, Sanjay. So let's go across to Husna now. Husna, we're gonna talk about another facet of this whole discussion, and we've been talking about the technology and all of that. So the technology, the fundamental of technology, that's where the data comes in. So from you, what we would like to understand or what we would like to hear from you is how data is going to, have its impact in creating efficiently working systems within a building. So, data is like, we can compare it to, oxygen for humans. So what it's going to do to the design?
Well, I wouldn't really go so far as to call it oxygen for humans.
Some people are already calling it.
That's investing heavily in technology, and nothing can compensate for the human connection. And the one thing about this entire time that has become absolutely crystal to me is that to ask the question, while looking in somebody's eyes, how are you doing today? No data system in the world can compensate for that feeling. And everybody has been ambivalent. We have been vulnerable. And yes, we may talk about resilience, but we all know from our families, our colleagues, that there have been moments of great flux, undeniable. And I possibly think that we are coping in a way that's unashamedly and should be exposed and revealed in the expressions of our psychology. So to dust it away and say that we're just moving forward with technology and how do we make it a better world is one part of it. But I was working from home, and I believed that it was, what was needed for the time, until I realized the morale of the team had started to shift. And I then realized that I really needed to meet with these people, to look at their faces, to ask them some fundamental human questions. And that's when the thaw started to happen. The coldness and the darkness began to be expelled, and the concern and consideration actually made everybody realize they were in this together. So data, as interesting as it sounds, is for me a cold and a concept which has made its arrival, and in some ways is even invasive into our lives. We are in this data mining world, and everything we say, everything we do is being accessed. There are buildings in New York City, windowless, where you have just thousands of systems processing the color of your cat and the name of your toothpaste. And all of that comes back to make you feel more like a product than a person. And I think that the humanity of the current environment, the fact that we're so deeply vulnerable and human, is what has been a fundamental takeaway for me. How to deal with people, how to manage your work culture. And yes, you have systems in place today talking about data, wherein BIM is fundamentally what that is about, wherein the client receives information about the building that he has commissioned, more than just detailed drawings, more than your expertise, more than your engineering, but information that helps him maintain the building so he understands the systems in it, abilities for the client to understand the user's perception of the space, the cognizance, when you've come into a space and you rate it based on the level of the air conditioning or the light levels, then he has information with which to assess your design and possibly how you would react to the next building. So all that is information that is undeniable, but I think it has to really go down to the core of how the human being experiences the space without so much technology plugged in, and that you have to kind of make a differentiation between the two, just like you do with the fundamental of a drawing, for instance. You could start by saying that architecture today has received so much impetus in terms of technology, that how do you actually differentiate between someone who designs a building on a computer and somebody who uses a hand? The dirty drawing, the drawing which is taped to your drafting board for days, which has maybe a coffee stain or two, has hours of rigor and thought, lines upon it which show thoughts and layers of thought, as opposed to somebody who uses a Revit model or a Rhino model and takes a section through it. I think your basic understanding of architecture changes when you actually work with lines, and the slowness and precision of that creates a consciousness which is not available to you through technology. So
Right.
going back a couple of miles from data and starting at the basic building block of how you perceive design and how technology informs that decision, and that the beauty of your hand and the power to think through it is not something that can ever be substituted. And that must be ingrained and understood by the generation of today to be able to actually perceive all the technology that has been forthcoming in a different light. I don't believe that they can see it until they actually feel it.
Right, right. I mean, I agree with you on a lot of things you mentioned. Like, like data probably does not, cannot sort of reflect emotions. It can certainly help us with the design and the process. It can, I think, help a lot with the speed, but yeah, probably it doesn't carry the same emotion or the thought process what otherwise as architects we would.
As
Uh,
human, we need to be incisive. We need to understand, the first starting block of all of this before we begin to code our lives into more complexity rather than keep that beautiful simplicity, which is what really drives us. And we must recognize that.
Thanks, Hosna. So I'm going to come to Sanjay, you again, and this time the question is like, so we've been the main subject is of course the architecture of resilience. So how do you see the architecture of resilience of 2021 different from what it was in 2019? I'm actually moving 2020 out of the scene, and its impact on workspace. You spoke about it in the first session. So just coming back on that point once again to you, Sanjay.
I would like to add some of my thoughts where Hosna she finished. She said that yeah, human connect is important, passion and like all of that. But yes, technology plays a big role. See, I am from a generation where we worked on drawing boards. But when we see this younger generation working with these tools and create amazing uh, like using computational design and using these so it's all about data and coding and all of that. So it's design and coding. So the way the younger brains are wired, I would say I would give a lot of credit to these children, because they are designers and they're also coding and applying these codes to create such complex structures, where they are also keeping in mind that how do you not waste glass. Let's say technology can help you design a building. When we did the Shanghai Towers, which is the second tallest tower in the world, it's a twisted tower because why it is twisted is because of the wind loads and all of that. So people think maybe it's a design element, but yes, there's a lot of play of the wind that made us design that structure in a way that it is designed. Then if you look at the glass panel sizes, so with computational design, you could look at zero wastage of glass. So technology can definitely, yes, we can use our brains, computers, and maybe calculators, and we can also come up with calculations and say, okay, we won't waste glass. But having a complex structure and doing coding and at the same time coming up with algorithms which help you not waste any glass in such a massive structure. So those are some of the unique advantages, and I would say, how do you make buildings sustainable? So that's one example of how do you make buildings sustainable. The second thing, what you talked about is how this resilience thing. So it is going to be there's going to be a big shift in how we are going to look at buildings. We will look at buildings. We will try to provide outside spaces. Right now, these were glass structures. Now there's going to be a big shift where people would want to step out, have fresh air. There'll be a big investment into the kind of filters that the air conditioning systems will use, so that you have cleaner air environments. And so all that is going to happen. So we see this shift. Already the clients are asking the developers, what kind of filters are you using in your AHUs? What is the air quality? So, and also what's happening is you're using BIM, Revit, and all these collaborative tools to let's say, data mine and come up with figures or which you can project to your people. So it's about human experience. When I walk into an office, so these things are adding to my experience. If I can see, okay, what is the quality of air today, or what is the CO2 level in this office, maybe it may give me some satisfaction when I walk through that office. So yes, human experience will remain the center of everything, all design and data and everything. The human experience is going to be the center for all the design, for all design firms, architects. They will be designing around the human experience. Data definitely cannot take over, or like virtual reality cannot take over what we can do in person.
Can I come in there quickly on something?
Yeah, Husna wants to make a point, I think. Yes, Husna.
I'm an admirer of the work of Frank Gehry after visiting the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris. And the complexity of that structure is awe-inspiring, because at any given time, you have no idea of the vignette that you've left behind and where you're moving. It's an art gallery, but the grandeur and the staggering, visualization of his gestures just enthralls you. So how does one create a structure like that? And you would think primarily that the computer's done it. As you walk in there, you don't think it's something that a human being can actually visualize, because it is probably one of the most complex and diverse structures, and absolutely epic in the way that it shrouds you. When you come in there, you leave all your emotions behind, your tabula rasa. It's one of the few powerful moments in architecture that I have actually had the privilege of having. So the interesting story is this, that the man who's 91 years old, who's a living legend, actually doesn't like the computer. He doesn't have no affinity towards it. He's infamously known to reject the computer and not have a rapport with it whatsoever. So how he starts his work is through scraps of paper, Perrier bottles, apples. He sits in his office and he will draw and he will use models to begin the journey. The genesis of the art is the artist. And that's where he comes in and creates something which is fresh, new, which doesn't have a root in the past or the future, and hence connects with both, because it's coming from a place of truth. And that purity is what drives his mind to that experience that we then have some years later. However, for instance, when he did the fish sculpture at the Barcelona Olympics, he was using flat material, mesh, stainless steel. So when you cover a curvature with flat planes, you need to know at what point the metal will bend. That's when the technology comes in. That's when it starts to assist the art. And that's when you get people to come into a room and say, now we need to know what the cost is. So he created a whole new company called Gehry Technologies. But the man himself and his sketches to date are the most ingenious thing, not the technology that merely informs that design. And that technology allows people to kind of work with how that art and craft can be actually 3D manipulated and built. Because to build a building like this is virtually impossible with just drawings. So the contractor then receives the set of 3D and says, now perfect, I get it, I can build it. So technology only assists and informs what starts with the tactile human connection.
I think what we're talking about is a design technology integration, and what Husna has just quoted is a wonderful example of that. So thanks for that. Sanjay, you wanna make a point there?
No, so like I was also saying, it's a tool. You cannot take away the creativity. So these brains have to be creative, and then technology can only assist. And
it gives you data, but let's never replace the
you can't replace
yes.
You can't replace the creativity of an individual with tools and data.
Right.
Prem, you've been using, I think you were one of the most foremost firms in India to have taken up BIM implementation across its, your projects and across this. In fact, BIM in India, if I'm not mistaken, is still at a very nascent stage, right? I don't see a lot of, the bigger guns have taken it up, but at grassroots level, we are still very, very nascent at it. But I do know that Prem's firms was one of the firms, at least in the Indian-based firms, who had taken up BIM way ahead of its time. He had already applying it for this. So I just wanted to know, I know even Prem is way ahead of the curve, thinking about how tech works into the design integration and the process in this. And Prem, what's your thoughts about this as such? How do you see the adoption of these systems have been into our design ecosystem within India?
Yeah, we first started using BIM in I think 2005 or 2006. So
Okay.
that's about when we adopted it. But we still use it very carefully. One of the things that we found is it's a very useful tool from the design development stage onwards, but it's not so useful in the conceptual design stage.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and I think there's I fear that this attraction towards looking at data and technology is a bit like the old joke about the drunk who's searching for his keys under the street light, not because he dropped his keys there, but because the light is there. So we have to understand what the core issues are and how we access them. Take hand drawing, for example. When I'm sketching let's say I'm sketching a plan, and I know I'm sketching an idea, say at a scale of 1:100. And I draw one line here and I draw another line there. I have, with my experience, I know those two lines are approximately 5 meters apart. But if I start with the computer is going to ask, no, is it 4.9 or is it 5.1? The computers insist on a degree of precision that is more than what that ambiguity in the early stages is actually very useful. So in those stages, actually, to move between hand drawings, physical models, and computer models is the dialogue between them is actually what is the most interesting, but not give up one for the other. But the other thing, there's a brilliant essay that appeared in Architectural Record a couple of years ago by a structural engineer called Robert Silman, and it's titled Thinking in Approximations.
Okay.
And Silman is quite old. He began his career in the 1960s, before computers were really, ingrained. They were just coming into structural analysis then.
Correct.
And he used a device early in his career called the slide rule. I think only people of my generation will remember what that is. But it's an analog computer that helps you do calculations. And he said the thing about the slide rule is that it uses logarithmic functions to give you the answer, but it tells you what the answer is, but it won't tell you where the decimal point is. So to know whether the correct answer is 10 or 100 or 1,000, you have to have a contextual feel to choose that correct answer. So Silman says that because the tools gave us very approximate answers, we had to sort of develop a feel for the project. But he says because of the computer, one, it has the hypnotic flicker like the fireplace that everyone stares at. You can't take your eyes off it. And the second is because it constructs such compelling visual models, we almost believe those models are the reality. And we start relying on that. And then we stop thinking about, having that feel for the project, that empathetic feel for the project. And so he says, even now, working with young engineers in his office, they'll do a printout of a structural model, and he'll just glance at it and he'll say, "This is where you've set up the model wrong. This is where you could optimize it." And the engineers are amazed and say, "How did you see that so fast?" And he says, "That's the way I was trained. I had no option but to get a feel for the project." So you have to be very, very careful, because it's very easy to get seduced and lose that feel and believe that the computer is the reality. And that's what you have to have that active guard against. A phrase we've been thinking a lot about a quotation we've been thinking about recently in the office a lot is Louis Kahn's famous statement, where he says, great architecture must start with the unmeasurable, go through measurable means while it is being designed, and end with the unmeasurable. And so, yeah, the computer is a tool when you're going through those measurable means, but you have to have that connection with the unmeasurable. And how do you have it? Because, how do you know the unmeasurable? That seems like an oxymoron, right? And if you think about it, whatever is fundamental and meaningful to our existence, whether it is love, joy, beauty, wonder, these are things we cannot define, but we know them as tangible realities when we experience them. So we have to be in tune with that core of our experience. Okay. Sanjay, for example, mentioned about how the younger generation has these new capabilities, but we also have to keep in mind that that generation has an incidence of clinical depression and suicide that's higher than it's ever been. So,
Yeah,
so
that's
there's
true.
thousands of years of human evolution which you can't change so easily, right? The core of
Yeah.
how we react is something you can't shake off. And we need to be in touch with that. We have to remember that when we talk about sustainability, we're not just talking about sustainability of the human environment. We also talk of the natural environment. We're also talking about sustainability of the human soul.
True.
So those things you can't lose sight of, and the technology is so compelling and so seductive that you can very easily lose sight. It's how to maintain that critical awareness is, I think, what we must focus on. And
That's true.
I think the pandemic has brought out the need for this issue of the sustainability of the human soul and the environment even more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It brought out both the darkness of isolation and all of those things, and it's brought out the fact that zoonotic viruses are a impact of our intrusions into wilderness. And we might get over the COVID pandemic, but we are still living a lifestyle where the probability of zoonotic viruses is very high.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we have to think of these core issues and those notions of experience, the core of what it is to be human. And I wrote an article which was also a talk I gave at a conference called "The Human Within the Architect." And the core of that argument was that we tend to look at everything, all of the problems we face within the profession as if we were, within the lens of our discipline. That's wrong. We have to remember that before we are architects, we're human beings. And we have to come to terms with that, the sort of ethical, ontological, experiential realities that go with it, and bring that awareness into our professional lives.
Absolutely.
But that's not the way we discuss things here nowadays.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, that's true. So have you also been working on, we call it informed design, where you have a lot of data, and so, the application of that to create a more meaningful architecture. So, your thoughts on that, if there's been a lot of talk about informed designs.
See, the way I see that, I'm very wary of a term like informed design, which is trying to say that the data is something from which you can derive your design. I think using data, using theory is a way you can critique your experience, because the danger of experience is also you can get trapped within narcissistic indulgence. So you have to look at, so the first check against narcissistic indulgence is the kind of dialogue Husna talked about with her team, to see the resonance, the spark in the eyes you strike in ordinary conversation. That's the first check. But the second check is through theoretical critique, philosophical critique, to check against data, etc. So I think the way we move forward in design process is actually conversational. It's back and forth. We are unfortunately taught design process as though it's a linear progression, and it's very far from that. Yeah.
Just one more point I just wanted to note it. A load of suddenly we are seeing the rise of mega scale floor plates, right? And when these large projects come in, I've realized a lot of firms use these softwares which permute and computate the settings themselves. So you feed your brief, you feed your requirement, and the comp itself, the software itself, tells you how many typologies or how many ways and variations of that floor plate setup happens. There is also a firm in Delhi, if I'm not mistaken, called the Rap Lab. I don't know if you guys know about that. It's run by this guy called Siddharth. He has this set up for in building in itself, where you put in parameters and the requirements and the orientation, and the software in itself designs the structure in itself. I'm absolutely not saying this is the way to go or this is the way, but I do know for sure that there are several firms who are using these permutational softwares within the firms. Even companies like Zaha, I'm pretty sure even Gensler has these in place. So how is these softwares going about into the industry adapting? So I don't know. This is, I feel, one way of informed design too. Maybe any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can take that question. I
Sure.
have 2 minutes left. I think I have to jump off for another meeting, so I'll just
Sure.
quickly take this question. We have these
Sure.
tools which help you, like data helps you take better decisions. It is not design. We're not saying that's design. So
Okay.
let's say how many, if you study a work style or how people use a particular conference room, what kind of technology they need, or whether they need a whiteboard or they need a screen, or what are the tools that they need in a conference room, and then what kind of meetings happen in a meeting room. Let's say when you study that, maybe maximum four people are using a meeting room. So you may have like 4 seaters, 6 seaters, 8 seaters, but sometimes you see that not all kinds of meeting rooms get used very often, and let's say only 2 people are ending up using a 8 seater meeting room. So once you study this data, it helps you take informed decisions. So, and we do that for when we start working with any organization. We do observation studies. We have people study, collect data as to how people are using the meeting room. So it is done over an extended period of time when we're doing workplace strategy and consulting. So that's again another vertical that we have. So that has got, see, strategy, workplace strategy helps you take informed decisions. So once you know, okay, these many meeting rooms are required, these kinds of meeting rooms are required. People like to have quiet areas or they like to work in noisy spaces. So these are through interviews, through all this. So data is collected not just by through technology, but by speaking to people through interviews and all of that. Once you collect this data, you can feed that data into, there are tools that we have also developed that help you do test fits. So these are not designs. These are tools to help you say, okay, this floor plate can fit this program or not. And when you said people are moving towards larger horizontal floor plates, there is a study around that. There's a study which says that uh, if you are on a similar floor plate, the chances of interaction, human interaction, are much more as compared to if you are on different floor plates. So let's say if I'm on a similar floor plate, the chance of meeting somebody or bumping into somebody, having a human interaction is, let's say, 95%. If I move from one floor to another floor, so 2 people on different floors, there's a chance of 5% of those people meeting through the day. So it's a no-brainer. If you look at the Googles, Nvidia, they are having very large floor plates, but then real estate is also at a premium. So the other thing that we are trying to do is, between floor plates, how do you create these connections? You exploit the fire escape staircases to allow human movement between the floors, or are you creating cutouts within the floor plates and creating these staircases where people can move to different floors and have these interactions? So these are some of the things which have definitely come through data. It's not like that you yeah. So data does help.
Okay, thank you so much,
Thanks.
Mr. Sanjay
Thanks
Agrobal.
everybody.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Pleasure
so much.
Sanjay.
meeting
Yeah.
all of you. Yeah, just
Sure,
great
sure.
meeting
Thank
all
you
of you.
so much for your time. Thank you.
Maybe just one question, either Husna or Mr. Chandravakar could take that up. So, we've also, like, we've been in pandemic, and then we're talking about repurposing of these buildings, right? So how do you see that, as architects? There's a lot of, there are large business parks which are available, and which was seeing, the usage between 5 to 10%. So what's going to happen to these huge, spaces over the years? So how do we repurpose these? That was just out of, a question which I wanted to bring into this discussion.
That's a very difficult question to answer at a sort of very general level. I would say that if there's a building which we find is not being sufficiently used and is calling for another purpose, it comes from a study of where that building is, what its site context is, the role it plays in the neighborhood, what other facilities are missing in the neighborhood. So I would say it requires more a sort of process of sort of analysis, site analysis,
Right.
to come up with an answer rather than to come up with a generalized answer.
Okay.
The only generalized statement I'd make is to really start thinking about the role that landscape plays in all of this, because a lot of these buildings like business parks tend to use the traditional international modernist example of buildings as objects within an undifferentiated landscape.
Correct.
And that that again is a model that has proven to be unsustainable. And I think given now that, for example, if you're moving to a model of work where
Work from anywhere.
work from anywhere is part of it, then you come to the workplace not to actually do a focused work at your desk, because that is more effectively done somewhere else. You come to the workplace for interaction and community. And that has to be reflected not just in the design of the building, but in the design of the landscape.
Great.
So I'd say uh, we need to generally look at the role that landscape architects play, both in sort of the design of large complexes and also in terms of urban design, to see how, for example, a technique that someone like Ian McHarg wrote about in the 1960s in Design with Nature, about how you analyze sites from the viewpoint of drainage pattern, physical features, topography, and then develop a technique of analysis so that you can look at how you can put your buildings on the site without disrupting the natural systems of the site. So I'd say those kind of things is something that we need to think about a great deal, because a lot of the places that you're referring to have caused fairly severe disruptions in the scale and fabric of both ecology and the city.
That's true. That's
Right.
true. Really, thank you so much for your patience, for your time, and for your efforts. You've been taking my calls in and out through the day. Husna, thank you so much for your patience and the time.
Great. That was
And
really insightful. I enjoyed that very much.
sure, thank you so much.
Is epic. Thank you.